Did neighbours say in his boyhood, he is his mother's son? This might set in a new and less painful light the severity of some things he said to or about his mother. We may suppose that she understood them very well. I have called this a digression, but I am not sure that it is one. Two things link the Psalms with us. One is the Magnificat, and one, our Lord's continued quotations from them, though not, to be sure, from such psalms as 109. We cannot reject from our minds a book in which his was so steeped. The Church herself has followed him and steeped our minds in the same book. In a word, the psalmists and we are both in the Church. Individually they, like us, may be sometimes very bad members of it, tares, but tares that we have no authority to pull up. They may often be ignorant, as we, though perhaps in different ways, are ignorant what spirit they are of. But we cannot excommunicate them, nor they us. I do not at all mean, though if you watch you will certainly find some critic who says I meant, that we are to make any concession to their ferocity. But we may learn to see the good thing which that ferocity is mixed with. Through all their excesses there runs a passionate craving for justice. One is tempted at first to say that such a craving on the part of the oppressed is no very great merit, that the wickedest men will cry out for fair play when you give them foul play. But unfortunately this is not true. Indeed, at this very moment the spirit which cries for justice may be dying out. Here is an alarming example. I had a pupil who was certainly a socialist, probably a Marxist. To him the collective, the state, was everything, the individual nothing, freedom a bourgeois delusion. Then he went down and became a schoolmaster. A couple of years later, happening to be in Oxford, he paid me a visit. He said he had given up socialism. He was completely disillusioned about state control. The interferences of the Ministry of Education with schools and schoolmasters were, he had found, arrogant, ignorant, and intolerable. Sheer tyranny. I could take lots of this, and the conversation went on merrily. Then suddenly the real purpose of his visit was revealed. He was so browned off that he wanted to give up schoolmastering. And had I any influence, would I pull any wires to get him a job in the Ministry of Education? There you have the new man. Like the psalmists he can hate, but he does not, like the psalmists, thirst for justice. Having decided that there is oppression, he immediately asks, how can I join the oppressors? He has no objection to a world which is divided between tyrants and victims. The important thing is which of these two groups you are in. The moral of the story remains the same, whether you share his views about the ministry or not. There is then, mixed with the hatred in the psalmists, a spark which should be fanned, not trodden out. That spark God saw and fanned till it burns clear in the Magnificat. The cry for judgment was to be heard. But the ancient Hebrew idea of judgment will need an essay in itself. 2. The Day of Judgment is an idea very familiar and very dreadful to Christians. In all times of our tribulation, in all times of our wealth, in the hour of death and in the day of judgment, good Lord, deliver us. If there is any concept which cannot by any conjuring be removed from the teaching of our Lord, it is that of the great separation. The sheep and the goats, the broad way and the narrow, the wheat and the tares, the winnowing fan, the wise and foolish virgins, the good fish and the refuse, the door closed on the marriage feast, with some inside and some outside in the dark. We may dare to hope, some dare to hope, that this is not the whole story, that as Julian of Norwich said, all will be well, and all manner of thing will be well. But it is no use going to our Lord's own words for that hope. Something we may get from St. Paul, nothing of that kind from Jesus. It is from his own words that the picture of doomsday has come into Christianity. One result of this is that the word judgment in a religious context immediately suggests to us a criminal trial, the judge on the bench, the accused in the dock, the hope of acquittal, the fear of conviction. But to the ancient Hebrews, judgment usually suggested something quite different. In the Psalms, judgment is not something that the conscience-stricken believer fears, but something the downtrodden believer hopes for. God shall judge the world in righteousness and be a defense for the oppressed. Psalm 9, verse 8. Judge me, O Lord, cries the poet of Psalm 35. More surprisingly, in 67, even the nations, the Gentiles, are told to rejoice and be glad, because God will judge the folk righteously. Our fear is precisely lest the judgment should be a good deal more righteous than we can bear. In the jubilant 96th Psalm, the very sky and earth are to be glad. The fields are to be joyful, and all the trees of the wood shall rejoice before the Lord, because he cometh to judge the earth. At the prospect of that judgment which we dread, there is such revelry as a pagan poet might have used to herald the coming of Dionysus. Although our Lord, as I have said, imposed on us the modern Christian conception of the Day of Judgment, yet his own words elsewhere illuminate the old Hebraic conception. I am thinking of the unjust judge in the parable. To most of us, unless we had that parable in mind, the mention of a wicked judge would instantly suggest someone like Judge Jeffreys, a roaring, interrupting, bloodthirsty brute bent on hanging a prisoner, bullying the jury and the witnesses. Our hope is that we shall not be judged by him. Our Lord's unjust judge is a wholly different character. You want him to judge you. You pester him to judge you. The whole difficulty is to get your case heard. Obviously, what our Lord has in view is not a criminal trial at all, but a civil trial. We are looking at justice from the point of view not of a prisoner, but of a plaintiff. A plaintiff with a watertight case, if only she could get the defendant into court. The picture is strange to us only because we enjoy in our own country an unusually good legal profession. We take it for granted that judges do not need to be bribed and cannot be bribed. This is, however, no law of nature, but a rare achievement. We ourselves might lose it, shall certainly lose it, if no pains are taken for its conservation. It does not inevitably go with the use of the English language. Over many parts of the world, and in many periods, the difficulty for poor and unimportant people has been not only to get their case fairly heard, but to get it heard at all. It is their voices that speak in the continual hope of the Hebrews for judgment, the hope that someday, somehow, wrongs will be righted. But the idea is not associated only with courts of law. The judges who give their name to a most interesting historical book in the Old Testament were not, I gather, so called only because they sometimes exercised what we should consider judicial functions. Indeed, the book has very little to say about judging in that sense. Its judges are primarily heroes, fighting men, who deliver Israel from foreign tyrants, giant killers. The name which we translate as judges is apparently connected with a verb which means to vindicate, to avenge, to right the wrongs of. They might equally well be called champions, avengers. The knight-errant of medieval romance who spends his days liberating and securing justice for distressed damsels would almost have been, for the Hebrews, a judge. Such a judge, he who will at last do us right, the deliverer, the protector, the queller of tyrants, is the dominant image in the Psalms. There are, indeed, some few passages in which a psalmist thinks of judgment with trembling. Enter not into judgment with thy servant, for in thy sight shall no man living be justified. Psalm 143, verse 2. Or, if thou, Lord, will be extreme to mark what is done amiss, O Lord, who may abide it? Psalm 130, verse 3. But the opposite attitude is far commoner. Hear the right, O Lord. Psalm 17, verse 1. Be thou my judge. Psalm 26, verse 1. Plead thou my cause. Psalm 35, verse 1. Give sentence with me, O God. Psalm 43, verse 1. Arise, thou judge of the world. Psalm 94, verse 2. It is for justice, for a hearing, far more often than for pardon, that the psalmists pray. We thus reach a very paradoxical generalization. Ordinarily, and of course correctly, the Jewish and the Christian Church, the reign of Moses and the reign of Christ, are contrasted as law against grace, justice against mercy, rigor against tenderness. Yet apparently those who live under the sterner dispensation hope for God's judgment, while those who live under the milder fear it. How does this come about? The answer, by and large, will be plain to all who have read the Psalms with attention. The psalmists, with very few exceptions, are eager for judgment because they believe themselves to be wholly in the right. Others have sinned against them. Their own conduct, as they frequently assure us, has been impeccable. They earnestly invite the divine inspection, certain that they will emerge from it with flying colours. The adversary may have things to hide, but they have not. The more God examines their case, the more unanswerable it will appear. The Christian, on the other hand, trembles because he knows he is a sinner. Thus, in one sense, we might say that Jewish confidence in the face of judgment is a byproduct of Jewish self-righteousness. But this is far too summary. We must consider the whole experience out of which the self-righteous utterances grow. And secondly, what, on a deeper level, those utterances really mean. The experience is dark and dreadful. We must not call it the dark night of the soul, for that name is already appropriate to another darkness and another dread, encountered at a far higher level than, I suppose, any of the psalmists had reached. But we may well call it the dark night of the flesh, understanding by the flesh the natural man. For the experience is not in itself necessarily religious, and thousands of unbelievers undergo it in our own time. It arises from natural causes, but it becomes religious in the psalmists because they are religious men. It must be confessed at the outset that all those passages which paint this dark night can be regarded, if we wish, as the expressions of a neurosis. If we choose to maintain that several psalmists wrote in, or on the verge of, a nervous breakdown, our theory will cover all the facts. That is, the psalmists assert as true about their own situation all those things which a patient in a certain neurotic condition wrongly believes to be true of his. For our present purpose, I think this does not matter much. Neurosis is a thing that occurs. We may have passed, or may yet have to pass, through that valley. It concerns us to see how certain believers in God behaved in it before us. And neurosis is, after all, a relative term. Who can say that he never touches the fringes of it? Even if the Psalms were written by neurotics, that will not make them wholly irrelevant. But of course, we cannot be at all sure that they were. The neurotic wrongly believes that he is threatened by certain evils. But another man, or the neurotic himself at another time, may be really threatened with those same evils. It may be only the patient's nerves that make him so sure that he has cancer, or is financially ruined, or is going to hell. But this does not prove that there are no such things as cancer, or bankruptcy, or damnation. To suggest that the situation described in certain psalms must be imaginary seems to me to be wishful thinking. The situation does occur in real life. If anyone doubts this, let him consider, while I try to present this dark night of the flesh, how easily it might be not the subjective impression, but the real situation of any one of the following. 1. A small, ugly, unathletic, unpopular boy in his second term at a thoroughly bad English public school. 2. An unpopular recruit in an army hut. 3. A Jew in Hitler's Germany. 4. A man in a bad firm or government office whom a group of rivals are trying to get rid of. 5. A papist in 16th century England. 6. A Protestant in 16th century Spain. 7. An African in Malan's Africa. 8. An American socialist in the hands of Senator McCarthy, or a Zulu, noxious to Chaka during one of the old savage witch hunts. The dark night of the flesh can be objective. It is not even very uncommon. One is alone. The fellow recruit who seemed to be a friend on the first day, the boys who were your friends last term, the neighbors who were your friends before the Jew-baiting began, or before you attracted Senator McCarthy's attention. Even your connections and relatives have begun to give you a wide berth. No one wishes to be seen with you. When you pass acquaintances in the street, they always happen to be looking the other way. They of mine acquaintance were afraid of me, and they that did see me without conveyed themselves from me. Psalm 31, verse 13. Lovers, neighbours, kinsmen stand afar off. Psalm 38, verse 11. I am become a stranger unto my brethren. Psalm 69, verse 8. Thou hast put away mine acquaintance far from me, and made me to be abhorred of them. Psalm 88, verse 7. I looked also upon my right hand, and saw there was no man that would know me. Psalm 142, verse 4. Sometimes it is not an individual, but a group, a religious body, or even a whole nation that has this experience. Members fall off, allies desert, the huge combinations against us extend and harden daily. Harder even to bear than our dwindling numbers and growing isolation is the increasing evidence that our side is ineffective. The world is turned upside down by bad men, and what hath the righteous done? Where are our countermeasures? Psalm 11, verse 3. We are put to rebuke. Psalm 12, verse 9. Once there were omens in our favour and great leaders on our side, but those days are gone. We see not our tokens, there is not one prophet more. Psalm 74, verse 10. England in modern Europe and Christians in modern England often feel like this. And all around the isolated man every day is the presence of the unbelievers. They know well enough what we are believing or trying to believe. Help thou my unbelief, and regard it as total illusion. Many one there be that say of my soul, there is no help for him in his God. Psalm 3, verse 2. As if God, supposing he exists, had nothing to do but look after us. But in fact, there is no God. Psalm 14, verse 1. If the sufferer's God really exists, let him deliver him now. Psalm 22, verse 8. Where is now thy God? Psalm 42, verse 3. The man in the dark night of the flesh is, in everyone else's eyes, extremely funny. The stock joke of that whole school or hut or office. They can't see him without laughing. They make faces at him. Psalm 22, verse 7. The drunks work his name into their comic songs. Psalm 69, verse 12. He is a byword. Psalm 44, verse 15. Unfortunately, all this laughter is not exactly honest, spontaneous laughter, such as a man with some oddity of voice or face might learn to bear, and even, in the end, to join in. These mockers do not laugh although it hurts him, nor even without caring whether it hurts or not. They laugh because it will hurt. Any humiliation or miscarriage of his is jam to them. They crow over him when he's down. When my foot slipped, they rejoiced greatly against me. Psalm 38, verse 16. If one had a certain sort of aristocratic and stoic pride, one might perhaps answer scorn with scorn, and even, in a sense, rejoice, as Coventry Patmore rejoiced to live in the high mountain air of public obloquy. If so, one would not be completely in the dark night. But the sufferer, for better or worse, is not, or if he once was, is now no longer, that sort of man. The continual taunts, slights, and humiliations, partly veiled or brutally plain, according to the milieu, get past his defences and under his skin. He is, in his own eyes, also the object they would make him. He has no comeback. Shame has covered his face. Psalm 69, verse 7. He might as well be a dumb man. In his mouth are no reproofs. Psalm 38, verse 13. He is a worm and no man. Psalm 22, verse 6.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of C.S. Lewis and the Psalms. We hope this dive into his perspective sparked new thoughts on these timeless songs of faith and humanity. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content that bridges the ancient with the modern. And please, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. How do the Psalms speak to you? Let's keep the conversation going.